Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Well, of course, by now you know that Donald Trump won the South Carolina primary. We're going to take a look at the results of that and the impact that that's going to have on the future. Of course, that puts Trump on the side of history. As the Washington Post points out, the South Carolina winner in the last 6 of the 7 contested GOP primary winners have gone on to win the party's nomination. Only Newt Gingrich from neighboring Georgia broke that pattern. So going back all the way to 1980, no one has won the South Carolina primary without also winning the GOP nomination. And those who won both South Carolina and New Hampshire, there has never been a GOP nominee who did not win both of those. Or putting it another way, anyone who won both of those primaries went on to win the nomination. Now, perhaps the biggest news, however, this last weekend might be the exit of Jeb Bush from the race. His support was minuscule. Looking at the polls, that looks like he only has 1% support in Nevada, according to the last poll that was taken just before he exited the race. So it isn't going to make much difference there. However, even though he had very small support, he was doing a lot to oppose Marco Rubio, spending a tremendous amount of his war chest that was supposed to scare off all opposition, spending a great deal of that against Marco Rubio. And of course, most of his money came from a few giant donors, and it went into super PACs. It was soft money. It wasn't hard money that went to Jeb Bush directly to pay for his staff. He was in a very tight situation when it came to paying for staff. That's one of the reasons he got out. Nevertheless, he had a lot of money, a huge war chest, over $150 million in his super PAC funds. Of course, the Right to Rise PAC hit the state airwaves with a lot of opposition to Marco Rubio. Amazingly, what he attacked him on was immigration. Not so much that the two of them disagreed on immigration, but that Marco Rubio had changed his position. First, he was he was against it when he ran for senator, and then once he got elected, he betrayed the Republican voters who had voted for them. So Jeb Bush was trying to make a point on that, score points with the Republicans, and yet he was opposed to what most of the Republicans want to see, and that is to not have open immigration. So it was a losing strategy for Jeb Bush from the very beginning. And of course, many in the GOP establishment, they saw this as a primary for who was going to represent the GOP establishment. Was it going to be Rubio, Bush, or Kasich? They called on him to leave, and that is what he has now done. Now, Marco Rubio looks to be the person who is going to pick up the establishment backing. He was one who had picked it up in South Carolina. He had Trey Gowdy. He had popular congressmen there with him, as well as the governor of South Carolina touring with him. Nevertheless, he came in a distant second to Donald Trump in that area. And as he was doing it, just before the election, as Richard Reeves, our reporter in South Carolina, pointed out, he backed out at the last minute of a debate, a town hall meeting that was going to be on immigration with Ben Carson and with Ted Cruz. At the last minute, he backed out of that. It was going to have it did have about 5,000 people. But he did something that was even more amazing this weekend. He accused Breitbart essentially of being a conspiracy theory website because they reported the remarks of ICE Council President Chris Crane. So, of course, it isn't whether or not Rubio supported immigration, because Jeb Bush supported it as well. The question was, did he betray the GOP voters? Now, Rubio slammed Breitbart on Fox News, talking to Neil Cavuto, saying Breitbart was not a credible source, and they reported his flip-flopping. He called Breitbart News basically a conspiracy theory website. Now, this was an interview that Breitbart had with ICE Council President Chris Crane. He was present at the Gang of 8 hearings, and he says he was thrown out of those hearings. Marco Rubio said, well, he's not an ICE official, he's just the head of a union, and it's being reported on a website that's not a credible source. Neil Cavuto said, you mean Breitbart? And he says, yeah, it's a conspiracy theory website. Now, Marco Rubio has written op-ed pieces for Breitbart in the past. Breitbart then went on to talk to law enforcement agents, pointed out also that Senator Jeff Sessions has called that individual, Chris Crane, an American hero because he blew the whistle on immigration corruption. And now when he blows a whistle on Marco Rubio calls him a conspiracy theorist because he's not going to call him directly a liar. Now, Breitbart talked to several sheriffs One of them was present at the hearing. Sheriff Tom Hodgson of Bristol County, Massachusetts, confirmed Crane's account. He said, "I was down there. When the Gang of Eight did their press conference, I was standing right next to him. He was definitely removed from the event. He wasn't doing anything inappropriate. He was just trying to ask a question, and they asked him to leave. Essentially, they threw him out." Now, Marco Rubio is saying that he has a path to the nomination. He claims, using, again, a talking point from Karl Rove, because that's what robots do. They just robotically repeat the talking points that are fed to them by the establishment. And this is something that Karl Rove floated months ago about Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump only has 30 to 40% of the vote. And of course, Rubio says that everyone is going to vote for him because he's the establishment candidate. Now, the reality is that the establishment vote is Rubio plus Jeb Bush plus Kasich. And that has a ceiling of 30 to 40%, not the other way around. Rubio is really Romney 2.0. As Politico points out, he has the same policy platforms as Mitt Romney. He has the same brain trust. He has the same key figures. Marco Rubio is essentially Mitt Romney without the eligibility to run for president. He is part of the same global establishment that supports open borders, that supports a global managed trade regime, as well as global taxation through a phony climate treaty. And we can see the kinds of people who are part of that trust. We just see in an article from The Hill, a secret anti-Trump donor has been revealed. And guess who this person is? One individual who provided 75% of the funding of the only serious anti-Trump super PAC to date. This person is Marlene Ricketts, matriarch of the Ricketts family that owns the Chicago Cubs baseball team, contributed $3 million to the anti-Trump super PAC, Our Principles PAC, which is being run by, guess who? A former Mitt Romney advisor. And of course, they have run $4 million in negative ads against Donald Trump. So you can see how the lines are being drawn between the establishment candidates and the non-establishment candidates like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. Now, Glenn Beck has said that the death of Scalia was something that was arranged by God so that Ted Cruz could get through. It may not end up that way because Scalia was an originalist, the kind of judge that Ted Cruz said he would appoint, but the same kind of judge that would say that he was not eligible to run for president. And when it comes to the confirmation hearings, many people are saying that Ted Cruz must recuse himself both from the Judiciary Committee and from the final vote because whoever is appointed is likely going to have to rule on his eligibility if he wins the nomination. Obama had this to say about the future of the Supreme Court appointments today.
Like me, some of you might be in the final year of your last term, working as hard as you can to get as much done as possible for the folks that you represent. Fixing roads, educating our children, helping people retrain, appointing judges, the usual stuff.
A very different story from Obama than we heard when there was 18 months left in George Bush's administration. Senator Obama, as well as Senator Schumer, said they should not have another Supreme Court justice replacement because there were only 18 months left in that administration, far less time now. And of course, there was a 1960 resolution by the Democrat Party saying essentially the same thing. Can we count on the GOP to allow this to be appointed by the next president, Republican or Democrat, or will they cave like they did on the climate treaties? Now, looking forward, we have a report coming up later, an interview with Sheriff Mack about the movement against a sheriff that is in Oregon. They're extending this beyond the people who are protesting in Oregon. We have the Department of Justice now looking to tweak the Patriot Act and prosecute anti-government extremists, an article on Infowars.com. But first, here's a report from John Bound.
While America boils with betrayal by the now naked criminal New World Order establishment, plainly verified by the trouncing Donald Trump whipped on dynastic pawn Jeb Bush and his inability to win even one delegate, the Department of Justice ramps up its mind war to once again sell the notion that domestic extremism far outweighs the threat of radical Muslim extremism. Kurt Nimmo writes, in October, with little fanfare, the Justice Department created a new position to emphasize the threat the government says it faces from so-called domestic extremists. John Carlin, in charge of the Department of Justice's National Security Division, told a seminar on terrorism at George Washington University, the event hosted by the Southern Poverty Law Center, that government and law enforcement now consider individuals and groups opposed to the authority of the state to be the top terrorism concern. A threat, he said, overshadows Muslim extremism. Carlin added that the Southern Poverty Law Center and other groups in this space are very important. In 2010, Infowars noted the Department of Homeland Security considers the SPLC to be a de facto division of the federal government.
You know, the mask is coming off, and you don't have to get a FOIA request anymore to find out that it turns out the MAC report was written by Southern Poverty Law Center. What they're doing, though, is they're brainwashing them. That's why we have to counter that with our own, deprogramming of the brainwashing. They want them to believe that, essentially, if you talk like Thomas Jefferson, you must be a terrorist, is their bottom line.
Having police that aren't brainwashed into supporting the criminal banking takeover, that is a danger to the criminals. But the criminals are literally in there, advising the police.
In April of 2009, a document produced by the Department of Homeland Security, Right-Wing Extremism, Current Economic and Political Climate Fueling Resurgence in Radicalization and Recruitment, characterized patriot political groups that reject federal authority in favor of state or local authority or reject government authority entirely as domestic terrorists. Reuters reported that in early February, Justice Department officials asked Congress for a statute to toughen the fight against anti-government extremists. A similar law is currently used to prosecute individuals accused of providing material support for Muslim terrorist groups currently on the State Department's list of international terrorist organizations. The Patriot Act codifies material support as distributing literature, political advocacy, and donating money to groups and individuals the government considers terrorists. An individual does not need to be involved in violence to be prosecuted. Moreover, the government does not need to show that any specific act of terrorism has taken place or is being planned, or even that a defendant intended to further terrorism, according to an ACLU white paper. If the government gets its wish and is permitted to use the material support statute against nonviolent constitutionalists, members' patriot groups, and those rejecting the authority of the state over the individual, supporters of Alex Jones and Infowars, characterized by the SPLC as extremists, may eventually be prosecuted as terrorists. There is clearly a hidden agenda to water down patriotic voices with the intent of strengthening the liberal psyop. Take this into account. Paul Joseph Watson writes, as Twitter suspended the account of yet another conservative for the crime of having the wrong politics, an account called Kill Donald Trump that advocates assassinating the Republican frontrunner is still active 6 months later. Despite representing an obvious violation of Twitter's terms of service, which state that users must not engage in violent threats, direct or indirect, the account, Kill Donald Trump, has not been suspended.
So we have a constant deluge of people openly advocating and in some cases actually saying they will directly plan the assassination of Donald Trump. Twitter does absolutely nothing, but they will censor a conservative journalist for criticizing feminism. They will de-verify a prominent conservative journalist, Milo Yiannopoulos. Again, for what reason, nobody knows.
Essentially, as the borders remain open and nearly 60% of illegal immigrants identified by the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement as criminal threats are not deported and are eventually released onto the streets of America, the establishment, drunk with power after quietly, for all intents and purposes, legalizing propaganda in July of 2013, means to saturate the American psyche with a bombardment of social media from psychopathic leftists, federal propaganda, and Muslim extremism, bluntly violating the First Amendment in order to shut down the national conversation in America, criminally struggling to gain a foothold to support a totalitarian culture of fear and control. John Bound for Infowars.com.
When government characterizes dissenters as terrorists and extremists, it's only a matter of time before they come after law enforcement itself. Coming up later in the program, we're going to talk to Sheriff Mack about the feds moving against an Oregon sheriff. We're also going to have an in-depth interview with filmmaker Kevin Booth and Big Mike, the entrepreneur behind Advanced Nutrients. We're going to talk about the failed war on drugs and the failed nation state of Bulgaria. And as we look at this, as we talked to them earlier, they tell us that the only chance that they have in Bulgaria is alternative media and the internet. The best way to support Infowars is to sign up for AutoShip. It gets you a 10% discount on all the products that you buy at InfoWarsLife.com, and it guarantees that you'll get it on a regular basis without having to worry about the products being out of stock. Another way to support us is with a paid subscription to Prison Planet TV to get the news each night as it's happening in HD and access to all of Alex Jones's documentaries. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with the filmmaker of Ghost Nation.
We believe in win-win, folks, treating people like we want to be treated. That's why we develop nutraceuticals with Dr. Group and other top researchers, chemists, scientists, you name it. He's one of our advisors, to come up with products like Anthroplex that is an original product that he made just for us. And this is a base system to make super male or super female vitality work even better. It is natural. It just helps get your body pumping and going in the way you need to be going. And Dr. Group is here till we go to break to tell us about the latest product at InfoWarsLife.com, Anthroplex, that out of the gates, and we do this all the time with a new product, we discount it out of the gates to get you to try it, knowing that you're going to love it. It'll sell out. So InfoWarsLife.com, Anthroplex, 15% off and free shipping for the next 2 days only when you get it with super male or female vitality. Let's go to Dr. Group. Why do you call this the foundation to start the fire, and then the super male takes you to the next level?
Well, we just look at the base problem that's going on right now all over the world, which is the endocrine disrupting chemicals, the amount of estrogen that men have, the femininity of men, and what's going on even in children right now with low testosterone levels, low sperm count levels, and the problems that and the attack that we're seeing on the endocrine systems of both male and female. So I'm always looking for ways to boost that and to make it more effective and naturally get the body to start producing these hormones and balancing themselves. So what we decided to do was, how can we add a few other components in there that would actually boost the effectiveness of the super male vitality and at the same time address different issues that the male might have, so it would be a full approach. And one of those was zinc. And zinc is actually necessary for the production of testosterone. There's more and more studies coming out that zinc is essential for hormone balancing.
What is in the goatweed? You've got one of the purest, strongest organic forms of it. What's so magic about the goatweed?
Well, the horny goatweed was given that name because years ago in India, they noticed that a certain time of the year, this weed would grow and the goats would eat it, and they would just go crazy with all the female goats. So that's how it was developed. It's called epimedium. And what that's been proven to do over thousands of years is increase sexual pleasure, help balance the male hormones. It can actually be used for women as well. But it really kind of resets and brings the hormone balance, improves sperm motility, and increases testosterone level.
So it counters the stuff they've been throwing at us. Results will vary overall. All I know is dynamite. I mean, absolutely dynamite with the stamina, with the weightlifting, with the swimming. Folks, the new product is available. Anthroplex, available at InfoWarsLife.com. Dr. Group, thank you for developing this amazing product.
Thank you.